All right, y'all, welcome back to my channel, Catfish Karma, and another rod building video. It's been about a year or so since I put out a video on building fishing rods, but that's not because I haven't been building. I've probably built close to 24 rods since the last time I actually made a video. And in those 24 or so rods, I've made a lot of mistakes. And those mistakes are going to be the focus of today's video, not this fishing rod. My hope is that for the novice builders that tune into this, I can save you some time, some heartache, and some money. So just stick with me. I think I'm going to get to turn those mistakes into at least 5 tips, maybe 6 or more. And we're going to get into the first one right now. So the first tip of this video has to do with these little dudes. They're winding checks. Some of you might call them trim rings or beauty rings or jewelry or bling, whatever you call them. The purpose of them really is just to add a more finished look to your build. A little, well, it's an accessory is what it is. And they're just aluminum rings. These happen to have a titanium chrome finish on them. But there is a trick when it comes to making sure that you have the right one for the right spot on your build. So basically, the mistake that I've made a few times in the past when it comes to these winding checks is thinking that I know exactly where on the blank each of the individual winding checks is supposed to land. But you see, some of these locations are not as cut and dry as, say, for example, that one. I mean, we know how long the butt cap is. We know exactly where it's going to go. It can only go one spot, right? So it's pretty easy to measure that and get that one figured out. But some of these other items might float, so to speak. You know, you might change your mind somewhere in the build process on exactly how long you want your handle length to be, the distance from here to where your reel seat sets. Other things that can happen is sometimes you might accidentally stretch your EVA a little bit or squish your EVA a little bit, which could float where this winding check lands. So my tip is never order one winding check based on one location. The much better move would be to anticipate that these items might float a little bit one way or the other. And therefore, rather than order only the one size you think you might need, if you nail it just right, keep in mind that winding checks and trim rings and that sort of thing are pretty cheap in the grand scheme of things, you know, a couple of bucks or so. So why not order the size that you measured for, but also order the size just larger and just smaller, because then if you float around, you've got what you need and you're not going to delay the build and then spend additional money on shipping. That's tip number 1. All right. I have got this handle section, you know, the grips, the reel seat, all that is finished up. And I'm going to let it dry overnight before going on to the next part of this build. But before I cut the camera off for the day, I'm going to give one more tip. And it has to do with fitting various parts, with reaming out those IDs to fit the blank correctly. More specifically, it has to do with your reamer and your choice of reamer. So right here we've got one type of reamer, right? This is the Forecast Dream reamer. This is the Alps Ultimate reamer. When I first started building, I used that philosophy of always buy the best tool that you can possibly afford, so you only have to buy it once. Now, this is a really impressive tool. But let me tell you why I don't recommend that you start with this. If you've never reamed out handle material, I think that these are harder to use than these. They cut so fast that you can overcut your grips. It can be even really just hard to learn to hold that grip in a way that you can get a good, I think the term would be a centric cut, so that everything stays centered. They are literally so good, they're almost too good, and they'll last a lifetime, and I'm certainly getting a lot of use out of them. But the Forecast Dream reamer, far cheaper, far easier to use for the beginners use, in my opinion. So there are copies of this out there. Other brands have copied this. I've seen some of those. It seems like those guys have trouble keeping the tape, the sandpaper tape adhered to the rod. I don't know if they're using a different material there or what, but I've had no trouble out of these. I'm on the same set that I've used the whole time. I've done a lot of rods with these and never even had to replace the tape. So that's the tip there. All right, y'all, welcome to day 2 of this build. And as you can see, I'm messing with guides. In fact, the next 3 or 4 tips that I drop into this video are going to be all about guides and putting on the guide finish. You know, that clear coat that seals these things up and makes them last for years. So I find this to be by far the most tedious part of building rods. It's something that I've struggled with, particularly the finish process of it. So I'm going to share some mistakes that I've made. One in particular you don't want to miss, because I'm going to show you the results of some really bad finish work that I did that I'll hang my head in shame over for years probably. But so this tip is about how to get started in putting your guides on here. And that is, this is not a start small, work your way up type of process. In fact, the reverse is true. You might be tempted to start on your smaller guides for whatever reason, but I have found that it's exponentially easier to start on these bigger guides, at least for your first few builds, than it is the smaller guides. I mean, if for no other reason than to handle them. I mean, it's far easier for me to manipulate this guide and get it started than it is these little dudes like are going to go on the tip of this rod. There's going to be, I think, 4 of these in this build. I have a hard time even seeing that, much less handling it and getting things started there. So, yeah, I strongly encourage you to work with your biggest guide down to your smallest guide rather than the reverse of that. And along that same line, when it comes to thread sizes, I want to show you something. This is size A thread. I don't know how well the camera will show it, but size A versus size B. Again, I don't know if you can see that, but it's size B versus size D. Very, very noticeable to work with. And for me, in my experience, from my first few rods till now, I much prefer to work with a larger diameter thread. It's easier to manipulate. It's easier to get the knot started. You might be able to get a smaller diameter to lay out a little bit smoother, but there again, that's going to depend on experience. So I recommend you do your first few builds with a larger diameter thread. If a large diameter thread doesn't match the build that you had in mind, like you want to build an ultralight, you probably don't want to put size D on there. So my suggestion would be, before starting on that build, just get a scrap blank or an old busted rod and do some practice, some practice installs with a large thread on just a scrap blank. You know, large guides, large thread. Do that several times. It's easy to take it off and redo it, because I think that you'll find it easier to work with. So I think that was 2 tips in 1. That said, I'm going to start laying this on here, and we'll get to another tip shortly. All right, y'all, this next tip really doesn't stem from a mistake. It's more about just a change in technique that I've picked up over the last dozen or so rods. When you want to get your guides on your blank, you got to have something to hold them there while you're getting your first few wraps of thread on. And for quite a while, I used the tape method like you see me doing here. You just, you want a good tape. This is a 3M tape. You want something that doesn't leave residue, something that's not real hard to remove yet. Sticks pretty good. And you stick it on the blank like I did there. The other way is the zip tie method. I put off the zip tie method for a long time, and I guess I thought that for some reason it was inferior. I don't know why I put it off, but I did. And now I'm never going back. I think it's superior. I use these little nippers to take off the tag end to get that out of the way, and then as you may be able to see, I've got enough wraps there to remove it. It's real easy to get it off of here. Boom. No chance of any residue. It holds much tighter than tape does, much tighter. It holds the guide foot much straighter. And I just can't, I can't ever see going back. I don't know, I can't think of a reason why using the zip tie method wouldn't work for all guides. But anyway, yeah, that's the next tip. All right, y'all, check it out. This rod has been back here spinning in the lathe for the last 12 hours, allowing the guide finish to start to cure up, which means I'm about to get to show you the finished results on this build. But first, I promised I was going to show you one more mistake and turn that into one more tip, and it has to do with guide finish. It's pretty bad. It's on this one right here. I'm going to show it to you now, and then I'll show you this finished rod over here, and we'll wrap this video up. So check this out. See that little dude right there? And his buddy over this way? And their little friend back here in the corner? Let me explain. You see, everything was going great on this build until I made the mistake of underestimating how important it is to control your air temperature when you're putting finish on your rod. It doesn't matter if it's the butt, the foregrip, the guides. If you're working with rod finish, you gotta monitor that air temperature. This wasn't the first rod that I'd built in wintertime and in cold conditions. However, when I built this rod, it was I think like 29 degrees outside that night. And this shop will get down into the, say like the mid 50s or even the low 50s if I don't leave the heat on. And on that particular night, I think that I had only had the heat on about 55. I had it warm in here when I went to bed, and I left the rod spinning, much like I did this one last night. But you know, I probably only had it like in the 60s in here when I was working. And obviously on other rods that I had built in the winter, it must have been warmer than that, because what happened was, even though I let it sit for several hours before going to bed and before turning the heat down, this stuff just didn't set up like it does when the room is in the 70s. Like right now, I've probably got about 75 degrees in here, even though it's cold outside. That's why I'm using the space heaters. Is I can really keep this one area really, really warm without heating the entire space. And you might need to do the same thing no matter if you're working in a big shop or in your living room. I want you to focus on controlling your air temperature so that you don't do what I did. I had a ton of time in this thing. I was super pumped about it. And now forever, I'm gonna have to look at this ugly mess on these guides. I'm gonna show it to you over here where you'll be able to see a little bit better. And I know some of you will say, oh, big deal. And yeah, you know, it's not that big a deal, but when you've worked hard on something, you want it to come out just right. And look at that. Those guides look like they got saggy boobs hanging off the bottom of them. Not cool at all. I've never had guides drip like that or droop like that or sag, whatever you call it. Some of them not so bad, you know, that's not too bad. It's just kind of bulbous. But this right here, my buddy James is going to make fun of me forever over that if I don't fix it. And I don't want to fix it because I've got too much time in this rod already. If you don't want your guides to be saggy boob guides, monitor the air temperature in your room or you will regret it. That said, let's take a look at this one and wrap this video up. All right, y'all, let's check out the final results of this build. As you can see, I did a spinning rod. I built it on the Rain Shadow Revelation RX7 graphite blank, 7'6". It's a fairly stout spinning rod for inshore applications. Obviously it'd be light for saltwater, but I built it for going after redfish, mostly bull reds, but also some of the smaller keeper reds. I'm also going to use it for striper fishing. I go after stripers a couple times a year, so I'll be throwing like some 2-ounce spoons with it. But I think it's going to have a appropriate action for throwing popping corks for reds also. I may even use it for skipjack fishing. Check out the chameleon guides. I don't know how well that's showing up, but these are the titanium chrome finished guides with those chameleon rings. They kind of change color in the sunlight, so they'll look completely different in the sunlight than they do out here. And up here at the grip, custom shaped EVA. It's end capped with those winding checks that we talked about early in the video. the Alps Rapid Spin reel seat with that soft touch. I've tried to think of a way to describe exactly how this feels. And the only thing I can come up with is it feels silky. You know, they call it a soft touch. It's not soft like EVA, but it's got a very pleasant touch to it. It's also got sort of a curvature to the top to it, so it's comfortable in your hand. The titanium chrome locking nuts there. But yeah, that's the results. My finish work came out pretty good on this rod. Certainly not perfect. There's definitely a difference from one side of my hook keeper to the other. But you know, I'm still learning. Let me know what you guys think. Hopefully this video was helpful to some of you newer builders out there. If you don't mind, do me a favor and leave a thumbs up if you like this kind of content and you might want to see more of it. Thanks for watching.